LinkedIn presents.
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. If you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Dr. Kimberly Janson about determining and developing leadership potential. Dr. Kimberly Janson, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to be with you today. You're joining us from the Boston area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about determining and developing leadership potential in members on our teams and within our organizations. I think it's one of the hallmarks of a great leader, one who can see the potential in others and help them recognize it and help them work towards developing it, providing the support to help that happen. And it's unfortunately a bit of a rarity sometimes too, because it requires such a focus on your people. It requires a lot of time and attention and frankly, a lot of energy. And it's a different way of approaching leadership that, some people don't find themselves perhaps they don't consider themselves able to do because they feel like they're too busy or whatever the case may be. So we're going to explore all this, unpack this together today. And as we get started, I wanted to share Kim's bio with everybody. Dr. Kimberly Janson is CEO of Janson Associates, a talent and organizational development company, and was named a top 10 thought leader, top 10 executive coach in 2021 and top 10 inspirational leader in 2022. She is also the author of Demystifying Talent Management, the winner of the Axiom Book Award. She is a business professor, doctoral chair, and director of the Center for the Advancement of Virtual Organizations at North Central University. The book, Determining Leadership Potential, Powerful Insights to Winning at the Talent Game, was released by Routledge in 2022. I could go on, but I'm going to pause there. Anything else that you would like to share with me or the audience by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
I think that was a great overview. The Center for the Advancement of Virtual Organizations actually references my co-author, Dr. Melody Rawlings. So I'm glad that she was part of the shout out. I would only add that I've had the pleasure of working with more than 300 companies around the world. I've worked on the ground in more than 40 countries with tens of thousands of leaders. So while we've got a deep research approach, there's a lot of practical experience as well that's fueled the different thought leaders. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. I appreciate that. And I see myself in a similar vein. A scholar practitioner. I do consulting work, but I'm a university professor. That's my day job. So I bring the scholarly kind of academic approach to my consulting. I bring my consulting practitioner orientation back into my teaching and my research. I think it's a good partnership and a good pairing. And hopefully that allows us to get the best of both worlds and cross-pollinate and get some really cool things out to industry, but also bring it back into the university setting and share it through traditional academic channels and with students. So that's wonderful. As we get started, let's talk just a little bit about the framing behind focus as a leader towards developing other people. And then we can talk about how we go about determining and developing those around us. As I mentioned in the intro, from my point of view, my perspective, I think there's almost nothing more important for a leader in terms of their their characteristics, their attributes and capabilities, than to be one who's invested in and focused on the betterment and development of your team. Yet that doesn't always happen. In fact, it's a little bit more rare, in my experience, to see leaders who are truly invested in that. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so important to have a leadership mentality around developing others, and anything else you'd like to say just by way of setting things up?
Yeah, so there were a number of great questions in there. Why do I think that is? I think there are so many competing priorities to run a business effectively. And think about how leaders got there. They were the best in some functional area. And so, Marshall Goldsmith's great book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, most people haven't read it. And they need to, because relying on functional expertise is quite limiting and doesn't create sustainability in organization. And there is a set of things that can be done that only leaders can do. And I think that the leaders just haven't been shown the way. A lot of times when you come out of a big house like PepsiCo, right, or Bank of America, they have gotten the joke around this, and they have done really strong work around creating an infrastructure where that becomes more evident and that you learn the skills on how to do that work well. If you haven't come through one of those big houses, then you probably haven't had that socialized. And then the second part, why do the work? Not only is it from the sustainability perspective, but most people have blind spots. Most people don't understand how others are experiencing them. They have tried their best to take something to a level. They find it acceptable. They need some encouragement or clarity or clearing of the way to help them develop in different areas. So I think those are all compounding factors that lead to a place where we're actually underutilizing people as a consequence.
And that's really what I see as the biggest downside of all of this is, certainly from a human perspective, I think it's important to value people, to invest in people, to develop people. People live their best lives, their most meaning-driven and fulfilled lives when that happens. So, from that perspective, absolutely, I think it's important. But from a strictly like organizational success, leadership success perspective, the best way to have long-term, sustainable, ongoing, perpetual positive results is through developing the people around you. And I just don't see another way around that. And so it kind of baffles me when I see leaders who probably conceptually understand the need, but in reality, where the rubber meets the road, they just aren't putting the time, the energy, the resources behind the actual development of their people. They're not building the bench strength, and they're not leaning on the expertise of their people the way they should. Like you said, so many leaders, they come up, sometimes formal leadership roles are kind of thrust upon them. They don't even want them, but they just kind of find themselves in a position where they're tapped to take on a role. They have no real background or understanding of leadership. So really all they do is leverage their expertise in a previous role, probably model or mimic what they saw previous supervisors or leaders do that they worked for. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. A lot of times it's not, because they don't really know what they're doing, and it's trial and error, and they're just trying to figure it out. The vast majority of leaders find themselves in that kind of situation. And when you find yourself in that situation and you're leaning too much on your own expertise from your previous functional role that you might have played, then you simply won't be in a position to, first of all, recognize the unique contributions and roles of everyone in the team, because you're going to be focused primarily on your area of expertise. But two, you're not going to be in a position to really help develop the other people around you, because you're going to be too in the weeds on things you shouldn't be in the weeds on, and you're going to be too oblivious on other things you just know nothing about, and you're not really involving everyone. As I see it, there really is truly no effort that is more timely and important for any leader to be engaging in than to take a step back, ask yourself the question, what are the needs of my team and the individual members of my team? Where are their skills? Where are their competencies at? What capabilities can I help them develop? Taking that time and then putting a plan in place, having conversations with your people, and then working towards it is really important. And even more perhaps than a structured development approach, just creating a culture and a dynamic where everyone recognizes there's a culture of learning, there's a culture of development. Everyone's expected to continually push the envelope and expand their expertise and work collectively and collaboratively, across the aisle to get stuff done, et cetera. When we can create that kind of an environment, then things take off. Then as a leader, you look amazing, because so many wonderful things are happening. And it's not because you did them. It's because you empowered the people around you to do them, the people who have the expertise to be able to do it in the first place.
I'd add two ideas to that. I think it also is a matter of tone from the top.
Yeah.
The CEOs who get it are able to push some of what you just mentioned out. But the CEOs who understand that it's a critical business imperative then pay homage to the due diligence that's required there. So as I think about it, if we were to write a 3-year strategic plan and plant a flag over here, which most organizations don't even have a simple 3-year strategic plan, and then I back into it and I say, here's my year 1 operating plan plus year 2 plus year 3. And many organizations don't do a good job even around goal setting in a given year. But if I do 1 plus 2 plus 3, it should get us to that destination. The secret sauce is to lay your talent plan right over it, to make sure that you have the skills and capabilities and resources for folks to evolve in the way that you want your organization to evolve. And then to create some accountability to leaders to execute on the talent plans they should be creating, or development plans in your language, that matches up to the business direction. And when CEOs understand that synchronization and work it as one of their 3 big levers, and I think those are the 3 big levers for a CEO, then it becomes obvious and it becomes more who we are, versus in many organizations, it's something that sometimes we do. It's often driven by HR. It's often disassociated from other things. And there's very little accountability for folks on, there's no teeth in the effort to hold people accountable for that. So I would add those to some of the things that you shared as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So let's pretend for a moment that we understand the business imperative. We understand there's hopefully some top-down messaging, top-down support. Hopefully I, as a leader, I get it. I understand why this would be important for me. That's a really good, important first step. And perhaps, that gets you 50% of the way there, even just having that level of awareness. But then you actually need to understand and determine what the needs are. You need to understand, where your people are at. You need to be able to meet them where they're at, and then you need to work with them towards that development. What, in your experience, what has been some of the best ways to go through that process of determining the gaps, determining the strengths that can be built upon, determining, the areas that perhaps your team is a little weak in, that different people can kind of lead out on, or that you can focus your efforts to develop, competencies across the team?
Yeah, a shout out to the importance of this piece, because we often, what is it, a several $100 billion business, leadership development. But in many cases, it's the absolute closing the door after the horse has left the barn, because we haven't selected the right leaders first. So what you're talking about in terms of getting a good handle on the talent that we have and choosing talent to bring into the organization appropriately, I think is the missing key to really having transformational work done on the leadership front. I've worked with tens of thousands of leaders around the world, and many absolutely should not be in their role. And they're in their role because they were chosen for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's past performance. And while we love good performance and we don't want to shortchange on that, it doesn't mean that that's the right person to be the next leader. And past performance isn't a predictor of future performance in a different role. And so to your question about what are the ways, I appreciate a good assessment. So I have a website called determiningleadershippotential.com. And it's got a list of common assessments and their purpose. I have favorites, like the Hogan Executive Assessment is a really good litmus of competencies, values, derailers, but they also give you a normative comparison that helps you have a sense of, wow, I'm really far to the left or right on something. And as a consequence, I probably have some blind spots, because if the norm is in the middle, I think things are much less or much more, and I should be aware of that. So the Hogan or some personality style instruments, there's others around intelligence that are a good foundation to get a sense of people's cognitive strength. Emotional intelligence is a critical component of being successful. There's some good assessments there. You can't deny the power of a good 360. The higher you go up in an organization, the more I advocate for a qualitative 360 versus a quantitative 360, because I find in those reports, the qualitative, we really do get at the things that are holding people back. And through those assessments, the top 4 things I look for as I work with folks that are the most reliable predictors of potential are intelligence, personality, motivation, and learning agility. Does that answer your question?
Baseline, just recognize the need for assessment in determining, right?
Yeah.
You don't have any magical powers of discernment. This is something I think sometimes leaders think. They really think, well, I've been successful. I've had, I've had all this high level of performance. Clearly people think I'm the right one for this job. And so, by the virtue of me being in this position, I'm clearly qualified to determine, blah, blah, blah. And you fill in the gaps with all these like magical discernment powers that leaders are supposed to supposedly have. And they don't. They just don't. And it's their own personal biases bleeding in, their own, experiences with different leadership styles and approaches, their own approach. And what ends up happening more often than not is they simply are looking for people who are like them, whether they fully realize or recognize that or not. They're looking for people who have similar skill sets, similar traits, similar attributes as they do. And so when they go about trying to develop those around them, they're, perhaps inadvertently, but often essentially trying to develop other people to be like them. And that's not what we need. That's not what we need. And so first of all, just recognizing, no, you don't have any magical power of discernment. No, you're not really going to be any better at determining through an eyeball test or even, interactions with your team. You're not necessarily going to be any better at determining who's going to be excellent in various roles or whatever than anyone else. So pulling in these types of assessments that can give you a more objective view of things and getting feedback from a variety of people, like with the 360 suggestion, all of that can then inform your intuition. It can inform, your thinking. And I think you'll often find that you're going to go in stronger directions when you have the baseline kind of assessment data to feed into, how you're going to work on developing the people around you. One interesting thing that I think is going to be really, we're just going to have to watch and see how it unfolds is AI and how deep machine learning is already being leveraged, ChatGPT. It's being leveraged in a variety of ways in organizations. But as organizations start to figure out how to apply this AI technology within their own organizational system and determine, good leaders, great leaders, determine existing team members and their competencies, I think there's probably going to end up being a really great level of sophistication and the ability to flag and highlight individuals within a given organizational context around some of the things we've been talking about, so that in real time you can see some of those assessment pieces. It'll be interesting to see how that develops. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll add 2 ideas. One is back to your concept of a leader may not have a good handle on their actual competence in choosing folks. one of the things I see that is missing is they're not trained behaviorists.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of subtleties that are offered in interviews or exchanges. And God bless people, they tell us so much more about themselves than they think they do. And so the assessment data, if you have really strong observational skills and have just even a little training as a behaviorist, then you can use the assessment data as directional to then ask follow-up questions, behavioral-based questions that helps you understand how people think, et cetera. So assessment is just an input, but it's also the competence of the lens of the person that is receiving the data and then how they're observing their folks. And I think that is an underemphasized point. On the AI front, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I'm doing some work in that space right now for exactly that benefit. How do we build a tool that leaders can benefit by, that can accelerate their thinking and help assimilate information and make it more predictive? So I think you're right on the money there.
Yeah, interesting. So let's assume now we recognize the need. We've set up a system for determining the gaps. Now we have identified what needs to happen, what development needs to be occurring with different members of our team. Maybe in our last few minutes together, what would be some of those first steps now in starting to develop that kind of leadership plan to develop the potential around us?
Yeah, I think certainly there's a two-part answer to that. The first is, over the next 12 months, what should be my short-term focus? And typically assessment input, or what are my goals? What does the business need from me? Those are good areas of focus for a development plan for a given year. But then the duality of thinking, where do I want to be long term? Even if you don't have a destination, but you have more of a direction, then having conversations with folks who are where you want to be, informational interviews to think about the world of possibility, then those are good things to seed into your journey earlier rather than later. From a company's perspective, companies who put people in different places over time have a result of people having judgment. Judgment is formed over a large variety of experiences over time. And so you need to be intentional with that. And so not only should we provide coaching and mentoring and immediate feedback on the absence or presence of things that they're working on, but we need to also think in long-term and intentionally about where we can put folks in different places to build their judgment. Because frankly, when I sit with CEOs or boards and go through talent planning, the thing that prevents people from getting the nod most is they will say things like, they're just not ready. But what they're really saying is, I don't trust their judgment. And so I think as you think about embarking on this, that's a long-term play. So working immediately to have that as an outcome is a strong recommendation.
Yeah. Developing that judgment, that emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and read situations in those interpersonal contexts. That's so important. It's really hard. That's not something that just happens overnight. It's a hard thing that you have to work at continually over a long period of time, like you said. So we can start now by helping our people develop those skill sets, right, regardless of what their current role is and regardless of what we think their future roles might be. I think we're going to be benefited from people developing those skill sets. But ultimately, yes, to everything you said, we need to recognize the importance. We need to be able to determine the gaps. We need to then put together a plan that's personalized for each individual to help them actually unlock their potential, develop their leadership competencies and capabilities, so they are ready when that role comes to them, and they're not floundering for the first 6 months or year, trying to figure out what they're doing because they've had no preparation, and that's what so often happens. Well, Kim, this has been a great conversation. I know at the time I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute. Before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Thanks. You can reach me at jansonassociates.com. You can reach me directly at kim@jansonassociates.com. We wrote a book because this is so important. It was just launched a few months ago, determiningleadershippotential.com. But as mentioned, we built a companion website, which is determiningleadershippotential.com. And the intent is to really help people become much more capable and have resources and tools. The other book, the Demystifying Talent Management, is a really good companion handbook on all of the fundamental pieces you'll hear about that's people related. Takes the mystery out of it. So feel free to reach out to me in any of those ways. The final word is that leadership matters, and that it is a science and a very specific set of skills that need to be honed and practiced and developed, just like your golf swing. Just because you watch golf doesn't mean that you can play golf. And we're just kind of crazy about leadership in that the person speaking French beautifully on Friday, well, you're so good at that, go speak Mandarin on Monday. And so I think we need to give it more respect, because the consequences are really on a multiplier now, because we've got so many people who are dependent upon that person being competent. So leadership matters. It's well worth the investment of time. It's a learnable skill. If you have high intelligence, no personality derailers, high motivation, and high learning agility, I'd bet the farm on those folks.
Yeah, well said. Kim, it's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Kim can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. If you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast, enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page. And please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe, and that you have a great week.
Ew, gotta get rid of this old Backstreet Boys t-shirt.
Tell me why.
Because it stinks, boys.
Tell me why.
I've washed it so many times, but the odor won't come out.
Tell me why.
No, you tell me why I can't get rid of this odor.
Have you tried Downy Rinse and Refresh? It doesn't just cover up odors, it helps remove them.
Wow, it worked, guys.
Yeah.
Downy Rinse and Refresh removes more odor in one wash than the leading value detergent in 3 washes. Find it wherever you buy laundry products.